Hello, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing a vlog form of the blog post which just went live today. It's called Why You Should Read the Divine Comedy All the Way Through and Not Just Stop After Inferno. And if you're new to my channel or happen to have missed any previous videos, I do have a playlist called All About Dante and the Divine Comedy. This will be the 21st video in that series. I talk about many subjects related to Dante and his magnum opus and his other works and such like that in general. So if you're interested, you can check out all those prior videos I've done on all these different subjects. And also if you're doing Baylor College's 100 Days of Dante, we're currently up to Canto 23 of Purgatorio when one of Dante's best friends, Forese Donati, shows up. I also discussed Forese and read some of his poetry in another previous video called A Medieval Rap Battle and a Stone Woman. So let's just get down to the subject. So many people have this idea that only the first third of the Divine Comedy is worth reading, and they treat it as the first book in a trilogy, instead of understanding it's the first of 3 canticles, or cantiche in Italian, in a long epic poem, meant to be read in its entirety. Do these people quit reading other multi-part books after part 1, or stop watching long films after the intermission? At least own that you DNF them. Don't just pretend, oh, that's the only part worth reading and everything else is boring and stupid, I'm not even going to bother with it. Here are some compelling reasons you should read the entire Commedia, the way its author intended it to be written, or to be read, Number 1. Dante didn't want his readers to stay in hell or end on a low, sad, hopeless note. He and Virgil see stars when they climb out of the abyss, and the next leg of their otherworldly journey begins immediately in the second canticle. Dante wanted to take us into the heights of paradise with him, even if he does warn readers to turn back if they're not ready for the intense theology of the final canticle. But he's not technically really saying just stop reading right now if you're not religious or interested in learning more. He's just saying this is going to be really intense and serious, so you have to have the correct mindset if you're going to read Paradiso and understand it properly the way I'm trying to intend it to be. Number 2. You'll miss Dante's reunion with Beatrice, one of the most powerful sections of the book, just full of such, intensity and drama and beauty and emotion and just all sorts of intense, wonderful things. He's not going through the afterlives for kicks and giggles. His lost love sent him on this journey to revive his faith and possibly even save his life. Some scholars and historians believe this wasn't just metaphor about being lost in the dark forest. He actually was suicidal, or even, God forbid, attempted suicide at this period in his life. And as Virgil tells Cato in Canto 1 of Purgatorio, this man has not yet seen his final hour, but so close to it his folly brought him that little time was left to change his ways. Number 3. Virgil's character development takes on a very interesting direction. He goes from being the steady voice of reason and totally in control in Inferno, except that one time he failed outside the gates of Dis, which Dante later throws shade at him and reminds him of this failure, to making more and more mistakes and not knowing what to do in Purgatorio. His character arc is possibly one of the most unexpected in all literature, because usually you expect someone for example, start out really passive and weak-willed and become a really strong, active person by the end, or just someone to learn a moral lesson, or just become a different, stronger, more in control person, not just to go from being this strong, wonderful, in control, reasonable person to just, I'm totally making mistakes. So just ask Beatrice about that. I don't know what to do, or let's go in the wrong direction. It's just something really interesting. Number 4, the relationship between Dante and Virgil deepens even further. Though they're only together for a few days, they become as close as father and son, far more than just a teacher and the person he's mentoring. It's just the way he talks about Virgil is just so loving and respectful. This is just more than just someone guide him through the afterlives. A number of times, Virgil is compared to a father or mother, and when Dante turns to him for comfort upon Beatrice's entrance, the word mama is used. He bursts into tears when he realizes Virgil is gone, and also when the Roman poet Statius shows up and realizes who he's talking to. This is really his idol, Virgil. He tells him the Aeneid was my mama and my nurse, and and earlier Dante had kind of derided the young words for parents, mama and babbo in the Tuscan language, comparing it to baby talk. But here he is using the actual word mama to refer to Virgil like at least twice. And also I've mentioned before, Dante lost his mother when he was about 5 or 6 years old, and so therefore it's particularly poignant to me when he does compare Virgil to a mother, whether or not he uses the word madre or mama, because that must have been a loss that hung heavily on him, and just he was longing for a surrogate mother for the rest of his life. Number 5. The poetry becomes more and more beautiful as the poem progresses. Yes, it also becomes increasingly difficult to understand and relate to as theology comes to the fore. Don't let that put you off from the gorgeous images, sounds, and turns of phrase. This is also one of many reasons you should get a dual language edition, and I do have a previous video on why non-Italians should read the Divine Comedy in Italian, or at least like look at the Italian side or listen to someone reading it in Italian to just get the full impact of the poetic turns of phrase and the way Dante chose to use sounds and language and such, and like repeating parts of words, and like he would repeat, certain like parts of terza rima, like mama, drama, and fiamma, for example, just like repeating that 3 times at different points throughout, and just all sorts of interesting things you can only really understand and know about if you're looking at the Italian. And number 6, there's a lot of emotion, drama, beauty, power, and tension in the second and third canticles, whereas there's not much room for most of that in hell, particularly, the beautiful stuff and like really emotional stuff. It's mostly just like as we go farther down in hell, the language gets earthier and coarser and just like more hopeless and sad and ugly. You can't really like write about the same types of things that he's writing about in Purgatorio, and particularly in Paradiso, because it's just not the appropriate place or time for it. Number 7, you don't want to miss the beautiful concluding cantos, particularly Dante's tender farewell to Beatrice, which moves me almost to tears and gives me goosebumps. Saint Bernard of Clairvaux' prayer to Mary, the one who ultimately set Dante's journey in motion, and the unforgettable final lines, which are just such beautiful parts of the poem. And if you just think Inferno is the only part worth reading, you're just not gonna like understand or know about some of the most like beautiful things that are yet to come that Dante deliberately like structured and set in the later parts of the poem, so you could like look forward to them, and everything is just building up to like greater and greater like beauty and emotion and drama and intensity. Number 8. Though Dante was a faithful Catholic, he nevertheless struggles with certain then mainstream points of theology. He finally airs these doubts in detail in Paradiso. Most meaningfully to me, as a non-Christian reader, he questions the teaching that only baptized Christians can attain paradise, even if they lived long before Jesus or in places like India and Ethiopia. He says righteous non-Christians, devout in their own faiths, are closer to God than insincere Christians. And as I mentioned previously, I think it's Canto 16 of Paradiso, I might be wrong. The only time in the poem where it's the same word repeated in the terza rima is Christ. He rhymes, I thought it would be unholy and blasphemous to rhyme anything else with that word, so obviously that translates over into all other translations, unless of course they mixed up the word order of the lines or something because they were trying to stick to a certain rhyme scheme. He's saying on the judgment day there are going to be all these people who cry out in desperation and pretended piety, Christ, oh Christ, and they will be closer to God and Christ than those who knew not Christ. And that's just something you don't really expect any people in that era to think about. It was kind of this triumphalist attitude, my faith or no other faith are accepted. Here Dante is saying I believe my faith is the only correct one, but I realize that other people in other parts of the world, they're brought up in a different religion or they don't know about Christianity, and therefore why should we exclude them from paradise? And it's kind of similar to the traditional Jewish concept, which is that the righteous of all nations have a share in the world to come, and that's kind of what Dante was going for also with limbo for righteous non-Christians, which is just a really beautiful special thing you don't really expect someone who was born in the Middle Ages to even care about. Number 9. Dante's treatment of women, religious minorities, and gay men continues to reflect a surprisingly modern, nuanced, sympathetic attitude, light years ahead of his time. He's still ultimately a product of his time and place, but his overall worldview isn't entirely tied to the Middle Ages, and I do also have videos covering women, gay men, and religious minorities in the Divine Comedy. It's really interesting. Obviously, I'm not going to go over all again because I've covered it previously, but gay men show up in equal numbers to straight men in Purgatorio, which is you don't expect that at all, because everyone who's in Purgatory is guaranteed eventual admission to paradise, so he obviously doesn't believe all gay and bisexual men are automatically going to burn in hell. And even when he encounters like gay men or men he like thought might have been gay in Inferno, he's like not really like saying the way you would think he's saying, oh, they're in hell because they're gay or whatever. He's saying like maybe weren't really gay, they're just in that part of hell because they committed like other sins also being punished here, to show even the greatest of people is guilty of sin privately. And he shows great respect and love and admiration for these guys. So it's just like really something interesting to think about. And obviously you can refer back to my video on gay men in the Divine Comedy if you're interested in more details on that. Number 10. The entire book is a priceless compendium of history, politics, religion, and mythology. There are also many astronomical, geographical, and mathematical references and calculations. This truly was a continuation of Dante's discontinued Encyclopedia Il Convivio, which I also do have another video on. Without Dante serving as the historian of record for many of these people, particularly the women, even hardcore medieval history scholars wouldn't know or care about them. And that was something I genuinely didn't know until last year, like famous women who are considered famous now because of his poem, like Francesca da Rimini. We genuinely would not have known about them at all, but only he took notice and cared about their stories and gave them more agency to talk about themselves. He didn't just, write them off, oh, it was just silly, flighty women and let's only have men in this. So it's just one of many ways he was totally like ahead of his time and preserved the stories of like people many other men in his era wouldn't really have known or cared about or thought to even consider with writing a single line about. Number 11. You will never fully, properly understand any book if you DNF it. And even if you just skim through the rest, you're going to find like lots of things are going to be left out. Like maybe you're like not reading a line you would have considered totally beautiful or a nice passage or an entire section or canto, and you wouldn't have known it was there because you like skipped over it or didn't read the book at all. So you just never know what like surprises and lovely things you're going to discover if you read a book all the way, even if you're not, like connecting with it well at first. And this is also, I'm going to be doing a future video about this too, based on a blog post, but one of the reasons you particularly do need to, lots of good outside sources, and in addition with notes and essays and such, you can't just like power through this on your own. You really need to read it with careful intent and just, have not necessarily like for example, when you like read the Talmud, you're not really reading it, you're actually studying it. And this is why like traditionally you always need to have at least one study partner to do it. And it should be similar to the Divine Comedy, even if your study partner is virtual and you're just like listening to lectures and such online and not studying in person with someone, because it's just so important to understand the full meaning of what you're actually reading, and not just like, oh, I can understand this all on my own and just look at some footnotes. It's just one of those really like intense books you just need a little bit of help with from outside, even if you're like a good reader and happen to know a lot about the subject already. Number 12. Many of the most touching, beautiful, memorable, poignant, and/or powerful moments happen in the second and third canticles. You'll miss them if you only read Inferno. Number 13. Dante directly addresses readers 7 times in each canticle, and the opening famously says, in the middle of the journey of our life, nel mezzo del cammin di nostra vita, not my life or life in general. He wanted us to feel as though we're experiencing this together, to put ourselves in his shoes as we renew our faith, hope, and priorities. And that was actually the reason I realized, much to my great surprise, I had to write my alternative history about Dante and Beatrice, which I'm writing right now in the first person, even though I'm like 99% of the time I always write in third person omniscient. I just realized it would just feel too distant and personal and not warm and intimate enough unless I were like writing a Dante story in the first person, although I do realize it takes a great deal of chutzpah to, write about one of the greatest writers of all time and one of my literary idols, like in his actual voice, not just about him in the third person. But, I had that moment like he does. I am not Aeneas, I am not Paul. Who am I to do this thing? I fear this will be an act of folly if I start this journey. Like, please tell me if I'm heading on the right path or not. But obviously I realized this was the only like correct point of view for the story I was writing. But just because, he feels like a personal friend. He's constantly inviting us to go along on the journey with him. It's not just, oh, this happened to me and like just read about it, or this happened to like a fictional character. It's just, I just love how he personally involves us in the journey right up to the very end, and constantly saying like, oh, reader, you can only imagine how terrified I felt now, or oh, reader, put yourself in my shoes, or oh, if you're worried, reader, about, you know, what's coming to you in purgatory, and like you're worried like your efforts at redemption here in this life, and you're just gonna like turn back to sin because you don't like what's, like, for example, like with the pride, they're bent over with like big boulders on their shoulders. Just, you know, realize it's going to come to an end eventually, and even if you are stuck in purgatory for many centuries, your penance can't last longer than the judgment day. So just, you know, keep straight on your efforts to reform yourself, and, you know, be strong. And it's just like constantly giving the reader like courage, and just just wonderful like personal things. I'm sorry, I'm rambling. So thank you for listening to the end. Hopefully my next post on Wednesday will be the blog post which I'm working on now, which is a history of English translations of the Divine Comedy. And next week I might be doing the finally the Fab Four book tag, and maybe a few AuthorTube related things. So hopefully look forward to that content, and please like, subscribe, comment, and share. And I'm also interested in possibly doing some collaborations with other booktubers and author-tubers to possibly, you know, bring more attention to my channel. Obviously not just like to shamelessly like do it to get more attention for myself. I obviously would like these people I would be doing with too as well, but I just feel like maybe that could be a little helpful boost to you know, collaborate with people with similar interests to myself. And I do have my email address, the one I'm using for the ursula.heartline@gmail, on my main YouTube page now. So please get in touch with me if you'd be interested in collaborating with some things. And thank you again for listening, and see you guys very soon. Thanks. Bye.